At dawn, they found him hanging upside down at the entrance to the old barn. A charred wooden sign dangled from his chest, with the word "Traitor" carved into it by a knife. Flies swarmed beneath him, and blood still slowly trickled into the withered dust. Standing nearby in silence were the sheriff, 3 drovers, an old preacher, and a woman with a child. Their silence wasn't out of respect, it was out of fear. His name was Lawrence Bridger. Once he had been a reliable man, guarding stagecoaches on the frontier, shooting straight, drinking in saloons, playing dice, giving his tithe to the church. And now he hung like a carcass, like a warning. Don't turn against your own. No one asked a question, because they all knew why, but rumors slithered through the streets of Long Haul like a snake over hot stones. They said it was because of that woman, the savage, the Comanche woman Jacob Holt had brought with him. No one had seen him since the night the riverside camp went up in flames. Only scorched beams and empty horse harnesses remained. Some whispered he had died. Others claimed he had run away with her, betrayed everyone. But the truth ran deeper and darker. It was that very night they found the woman on the edge of the prairie, wounded, starved, barefoot. Jacob looked into her eyes, and for the first time he didn't see an enemy, though the world insisted otherwise. She lay in the dry grass, eyes half shut, breath ragged. She wore a torn shirt, not of her people. It looked like she'd escaped captivity. Shreds of rope lay nearby. Jacob jumped from his horse and brought her a water flask. She drank like someone remembering how to live. The others, Carver, Lawrence, old Bowers, stood at a distance, their eyes like wolves scenting blood. "She's one of them," Carver said, staring her down. "Comanche don't travel alone. Where's the rest of 'em?" "If she'd come with a war party," Jacob said quietly, "we'd already be 6 feet under." Lawrence said nothing. He'd known Jake since youth, herding horses together, crossing half of Texas in dust and gunfire. But this time something was different in his gaze. Distance. Caution. Like he knew, the road split here. Her name was Saka. She spoke little, only short, broken English, but her voice held a strength that shattered chains. Jacob began to understand. Someone had tried to sell her. Or worse, someone in uniform. Someone with rank but no honor. She'd escaped and survived. And now she was a target. In the first days on the trail, she kept her distance, but at night, by the fire, she stared into the flames, not like a prisoner, but like a hunter waiting for a twitch in the brush, and Jacob felt something shift inside him each time she looked at him. Suspicion grew. The council fire was lit within days. They wanted to tie her up, return her to the fort. Jacob stood before them, hands on his revolvers, said, "Anyone touches her, touches me." That's when everything cracked. Even Lawrence, jaw clenched, said, "You're putting her above us, Jake?" "I'm putting her above a lie," he answered. But Long Haul was drawing closer by the day, and with it the laws of the strong. The sheriff there drank with slavers. Wagons rolled into the fort with tobacco, corn, and something kept hidden under tarps. Jacob learned there was a bounty on a Comanche woman who'd escaped from Officer Randall's hands. $200. Alive. No trials. No questions. Lawrence broke. He tried to buy his friend off. "Give her up. It'll all end." But Jacob didn't back down. That night, they came to the camp, 6 men armed with torches and iron cuffs. Saka fought like a wildfire, but they bound her. Jacob fought until he collapsed. They left him in the blood and dust, assumed he wouldn't get up. But he did. He crawled over stones, cauterized wounds with a heated knife, made it to a Cherokee village, spent a month between life and death, then rose, with only one goal in his eyes: bring her back, not for love, for honor. He gathered 3 men, an old warrior who remembered Tecumseh, a runaway ship's cook, and a hunter whose son the fort had taken. They left at night. The wind carried sand and bitterness. The fort burned. Jacob found her in the dungeon. Her skin was bruised, but her eyes still the same. She said, "You came." Their journey became a flight, days in the saddle, nights in the mountains. They were hunted. Rumors grew. Some said Lawrence tried to protect them, went to the sheriff, said, "He's not a traitor, he's a man." But his words burned with him. They hanged him. Now they are outcasts, Jacob and Saka, still moving, somewhere south where the forests are thicker, where the sun burns gentler, and people don't ask questions. Did he really have a choice? When at sunset, through the hot wind and the ring of horseshoes, he saw dust rising on the hillside, not just the wind, but dust kicked up by hooves. They were coming, again, relentless like the earth itself. 5 of them, 2 in blue, 3 in leather dusters, bounty hunters. There was a price on them now, on her, on him, on their names. Jacob crouched by the trail, touched the dirt with his fingers, then looked at Saka. She understood without a word. She nodded. Jacob exhaled like before a river dive and fired. The bullet hit the first one in the gut. He collapsed with a dull cry like a sack of grain. The second raised his weapon, but Saka's arrow pierced his shoulder. He screamed like a coyote. Then it all turned to chaos, roaring, stomping, shouting, churning gunfire. One of the blue coats yelled, "You won't get away, Holt! Your name will burn with you!" But they got away. Again. Through gullies, across dry riverbeds where snake bones cracked beneath their feet. That night, Saka found a spring hidden under thick bushes. She washed her face while Jacob counted his bullets. He had 8 left. Then he sat beside her. They didn't speak, just breathed. Somewhere, a coyote howled, long, mournful, like it was howling for the dead. "Did you think we'd die?" she asked suddenly. "Every night," he said. "But we're still alive, so we must be on the right path." On the 5th day, they reached an abandoned mission at the base of a hill. Once, souls were saved there. Now, only the walls were rotting. The monks were gone or driven out. All that remained was an old bell tower and a stone oven where someone had once baked corn cakes. Saka found an old doll in the corner. She held it for a long time. Then she burned it. "This place remembers someone else's pain," she said. "That means it can hide ours." They stayed there for a week. Jacob tended wounds, mended a saddle. Saka built a thorn fence. At night, she sang something soft in her own tongue, as if lulling dark spirits to sleep. He watched her and felt that everything before, horses, saloons, the clink of coins, dust in his teeth, meant nothing. Only this, only her, only their path. One morning, a whistle sounded. Jacob rose with his rifle, but saw a figure climbing the hill, barefoot, with a strip of cloth around his neck. It was a boy, an Indian boy, maybe 10 years old. He carried a basket, walked right up to them, unafraid of weapons, set the basket down and said, "You are Jacob Holt. You walk against the wave. My grandfather needs you." Saka glanced at him. Jacob asked, "What grandfather?" "The one who eats no meat and hears the wind in his bones," the boy said. The next day they followed him, through forest paths where the scent of pine gave way to the aroma of wet earth. High in the mountains lived an old man. He must have been over 100. He didn't speak English, but Sokka understood. He knew who they were. He saw what was coming. He said, Sokka said nothing, but her eyes burned like a warrior before a final battle. And so they rode again to Fort Union, not to die, to speak truth, to rip off the mask. They knew they'd be met without mercy, that the ones in power shoot first, but fear was far behind now. Now there was a path and a purpose. They walked toward Fort Union across scorched land where no grass grew and bones lay on the surface of the earth as if the wind had forced them out, a reminder to all who still lived. Behind them remained the old mission, the prophet elder, and the boy with wolf's eyes. Ahead, a fortress where the walls reeked of gunpowder and lies. Jacob walked first. The sun had burned his face, and his hat was frayed at the edges. He didn't look around. He'd already seen everything worth seeing. Sokka walked beside him. No other woman ever carried herself like that among drovers. She had a bow slung across her back, a knife at her belt, and a gaze that even coyotes yielded to. They didn't speak. Words wouldn't change anything now. They knew. All or nothing. When the fort rose on the horizon, the air grew thicker. Towers, flags, guards at the gate. The hammering of a forge. Thick stone walls. Jacob knew this place. In his youth he had stood watch here, eaten army stew, laughed in the barracks. Now his name was on wanted posters. The last time he'd been here was 2 years ago, back when he still believed honor lived in uniforms and orders. Now he knew. Honor is something you dig out of the mud before you bury it. They didn't walk up to the gates directly. They stopped by a stream where muddy water coiled around twisted roots. There a man was waiting, an old bearded hunter named Pete McRae, the one who once taught Jake how to throw a knife. He came as promised, at sunset, with a rifle and a bag. "You've lost your damn mind," were his first words. "You know how much your head's worth?" "And how much is the truth worth, Pete?" Jacob asked. "No one pays for truth around here, just for blood." Jacob pulled something from his saddlebag, an old leather journal warped by damp. He had found it at the river camp, in the wagon Sokka had escaped from. It had belonged to an officer. Inside were dates, names, routes, and numbers. Exact prices for people, for children, for women, for slaves. All signed, clear. At the bottom, to be delivered to Captain Randall. Pete flipped through the pages. "Damn, if this comes out." "That's the whole point," Jacob said. "But we need someone to bring it out. Someone who isn't afraid." Pete looked at him, then at Sokka, long and hard. Then, without a word, he placed the journal in his bag and said, "In 3 days, a convoy with an army inspection will arrive here. If this is real, they'll stop at the fort overnight. If you want people in Washington to hear this, you have to get in, and stay alive, at least till morning." They rode out that night. The horses were tired, but their hearts sharp. The ground cracked beneath their hooves. The stars above seemed closer than usual. Sokka rode in silence, as if saying goodbye to every mile of the road. Jacob knew now that each step they took was a stone into water. The ripple would travel far. But he wasn't running anymore. He was walking forward. By dawn they reached the back of the fort, where an old stone wall had long since cracked. He remembered it from youth. If you knew where to step, you could slip through. Saka climbed first, like a shadow. Jacob followed. They ended up in a storage barn filled with barrels of grain and salt. It stank of rats and stale water. "How much time do we have?" she asked. "An hour, maybe less." They were heading to the office where the inspection would be received. Jacob waited, then stepped out of the shadows. "Captain Randall!" His voice cracked like a shot. Randall turned. He recognized him. His eyes narrowed. "You should be dead." "And you, in prison." He threw the journal. It landed at Randall's feet, open. Words like knives, names, sums, blood. The guards tensed. One raised his rifle. Saka was already behind them, a bow in her hands. "Don't," Jacob said. "You won't be fast enough." Randall slowly bent down, picked up the journal, flipped through it. His face stayed stone, but sweat glistened on his brow. "This is a forgery," he said. At that moment, 3 men in gray uniforms entered the hallway, the inspection team. They heard his last words. One of them, older with white mustache, stepped forward and took the journal. "You say forgery? Then why does your handwriting here match the report you handed me yesterday for signature?" Silence. Tension thick enough to taste. Breath caught. The guards looked at each other. Jacob stared into Randall's eyes and saw the crack form in his pride, saw the color drain from his face, saw everything he had built start to crumble. And then someone fired a shot. The bullet tore into the air like a needle through tendon, slicing the silence. The first sound was the crack of glass from the window it struck. The second, a dull groan. One of the guards clutched his shoulder, dropping to his knees. It wasn't Saka who fired. It was a soldier lurking in the shadows, loyal to Randall. Loyalty, like a rusted knife, cuts those closest. Jacob flinched, shoved Saka aside, and fired back without aiming, just toward where the barrel had flickered. A scream, then silence again. The inspection team backed against the wall in panic. The senior officer, General Harton, the one with the white mustache, pulled out his revolver and pointed it at Randall. "Enough! Drop your weapons, all of you!" His voice cracked like old leather. "I've seen enough. This man, Holt, risked his life to bring us the truth, and you tried to kill it." Randall stood as if time had stopped. His face burned. He understood he had lost, but surrender was not in him. He drew his pistol, a movement sharp as a snake's strike. Jacob was faster. The bullet struck the captain in the chest, flinging him backward. He crashed onto the desk, knocking over the inkwell, the papers, the pride. Blood spread across his uniform like a crimson flower. He breathed, ragged, weak, and said, "You betrayed your own for a savage." Jacob stepped closer, looking down at him. "You betrayed everyone who ever believed in you." Randall said nothing more. The silence in the room was so deep you could hear a fly tapping at the window pane. General Harton lowered his weapon. He looked at Jacob for a long time. "You knew you were risking everything by coming here?" "Yes." "You knew they might execute you for this?" "Yes." "Then why did you do it?" He turned to Saka. She looked the general straight in the eye, not a trace of fear. "Because some things are worth dying for," Jacob said. "And some people you don't give to the wolves. Not for gold, not for medals." Everything spun after that, like a dust storm over the plains. Randall was buried without honors. His case was passed to the Santa Fe District Court. The Army inspection confirmed the facts. Several officers and commandants were dismissed. 2 were arrested. Newspapers in the East blazed with headlines. "Soldier defies orders, saves nation's honor." But few knew the cost. Fort Union became a place of inquiries and reforms. But Jacob Holt, he didn't stay. When the dust settled, he and Saka left the fortress walls. No medals, no speeches. He refused a pardon. He told the general, "The law shouldn't forgive those who break it, even if it was for something good." The general understood, but he signed it anyway. Let history decide who was right. They headed west, to where land was still untouched by greed, to the land of red rocks and high plateaus, where winds sang at night and eagles thundered by day. They weren't searching for vengeance, only peace. At first, they lived in a cabin by the river. Saka fished and grew corn. Jacob built a corral for horses. He no longer carried a weapon. He watched the sky. He listened. He had once been a stagecoach guard, a bandit, a fighter at fairs. Now he had become what he once feared, a man with a past. One day, Saka said, "You gave me freedom. I gave you a home." "You are my home," he replied. But even in silence, the past finds a way. One day, a boy came to their cabin, native, with eyes like hers. "Are you Jacob Holt?" "Depends on who's asking. My mother said you're the man who broke the circle. She wants you to come. We need you." Saka came out when she heard. "It's my people. Something's wrong." And once again, the road. Horses, saddles worn with leather, dust and wind. They rode toward a Comanche village where Saka was born. The village stood on the edge of terror. The goldmen were coming, with guns, papers, and cruel eyes. The kind of men who thought land could be bought. Jacob knew that look. When they arrived, the chief, an old man with a face like cracked earth, greeted them without a smile. "You left with our daughter, and returned with her, but now it depends on you whether we survive." A gold company had bought the rights to the river, papers signed by a traitor, through deception. If the Comanche didn't leave, a purge would begin. Jacob looked at the map, the signatures, the seals. This can be stopped, but not with words. They need someone to remind them that there are lines that must not be crossed. That night, he sat by the fire. The flames burned his eyes. Faces around him were silent. Men in feathers, women with children. Saka beside him, her hand on his knee. "You want to become a weapon again?" she asked. "No," he said. "I want to be the last obstacle." The day Jacob Holt strapped on a gun again was hot as a puma's breath. The air shimmered like an anvil where fate forges iron. He said nothing as he buckled the holster, nothing as he saddled the horse. Only his eyes spoke, and what they said was more terrifying than words. Resolve. Saka looked at him like she was already saying goodbye. But she didn't stop him. She knew he couldn't stand aside, not after everything. The company was called Sangrain Minerals, a beautiful name for a filthy business. They had already fenced off part of the river with wooden stakes, burned several acres of forest, and brought in a team of armed mercenaries. They had papers. The law was on their side. But justice was with those who were never asked. The Comanche knew. Their village would be next. Jacob rode out alone. He didn't take any warriors. That would have been a declaration of war. He rode as a messenger, or maybe as a final warning. The hooves beat the dusty earth like a counting heart. By the time he reached the company's camp, the sun was setting. Watchtowers loomed over the plains like ugly needles. Tents, guard posts, a fence. He rode straight to the front gate. 3 men greeted him. A guard with a rifle, a black-haired man in a vest, and a man in a top hat. The overseer, it seemed. "Name?" the man asked. "Jacob Holt." "You come from the tribe?" He spat into the dust. "I come as a man who's seen how stories like this end." "This isn't your land, Holt. It's not yours either. We've got documents, a deal with the territorial administration, all by the letter of the law. Sometimes the law's just dust on your boots, and sometimes it's a sentence. You act like this land's been waiting for you, but it remembers everyone who tried to take it by force. It remembers bones and blood." The overseer snorted. "What do you want?" "Leave. Give the land back. Or stay and face the truth." "Truth? You've got nothing, Holt. No authority, no soldiers, no signature, just a name, and even that's filthy." "Yeah," Jacob nodded. "But I've got a past. And in that past, there were men like you. You know how it ended?" He turned his horse without waiting for an answer. 3 days later, the company began expanding. Axes came, wagons, workers. They cleared trees 5 miles from the settlement. The Comanche watched from the hills. They didn't attack. They waited. Jacob left again. He rode to Taos. There was a man there, Ezra Blend, an old newspaper man, half blind, but with a memory sharp as a coyote. Jacob brought him maps, signatures, records, every document he could find, but most importantly, stories. Stories of women taken, stories of stolen cattle, stories of land given away without consent. Ezra listened, drumming his fingers on the table. "You know, Holt, I've written more obituaries than wedding announcements, but your story, it could be both. I don't need words. I need truth. You'll get it. But first, there'll be blood." Jacob returned a week later. As he approached the village, he saw smoke. Not from fire, from signal fires. Saka met him at the gates. Her face looked worn, like a field after a storm. "They've moved closer. They're at the stream now. By dawn, they'll be here." He said nothing, just nodded. Then he took off his hat, wiped the sweat from his brow, and went to the hut where his old carbine lay. The same one he once used to guard stagecoaches in Arkansas. He checked the bolt, the rounds, his shoulder, and stepped out again. The next day, the village greeted the dawn in silence. Not a single Comanche moved. The women stood with the children, the men with spears and bows, but no one rushed into battle. Only Jacob stepped forward, alone. He stood between the river and the advancing workers. Hundreds of paces, one man. The company corporal shouted, "Get out of the way, Holt! This isn't your fight!" Every fight becomes mine when it starts with a lie. He raised the carbine, didn't aim, and fired into the air. Birds scattered, the workers halted. The corporal cursed and raised his hand. The soldiers began to move forward. Jacob fired again into the ground near the corporal's feet. The man flinched. Then, like thunder from the sky, a howl rose from the hills, not a scream, a war cry, the kind that makes the stones tremble. The Comanche emerged, slowly, 3 by 3, men in feathers, women with torches.